I was born just a few years, or just a couple of years before the war. So I was 2 years old when the war began. I really don't have any memories, but I do have some photographs, and those are uh, very important in terms of the kind of life uh, that we had. Both my mother and father were from Poland originally, so that's very significant. And I've been back to the town where they were from. Especially my mother, came from a large extended family, but my father and mother uh, left Poland, uh, left their town in the mid 1930s, between World War One and World War Two, when there were a lot of people, a lot of young Jews like themselves from Poland or Russia, were going, especially to France, because France was seen as a welcoming uh, country. So my father came first in 1933, my mother in 36, and then I was born in 37. I should add that the countryside was about an hour away, which is today the suburbs. But that countryside, where working people went on the weekends, was very important, because that's where people like me were eventually hidden. So the town was called Le Vergalon, and um, and evidently, I'm finding this out now. There were a lot of Jewish children who were hidden there, and as we speak right now, we're in the process of having the town recognized by Yad Vashem, because like I said, many of these Jewish children, besides me, I always thought I was the only one hidden out there, but I wasn't. I found that, then I found this friend of mine that was, he says, I was hidden there too. I couldn't believe it, because I thought I was the only one. But then it turned out that many children, because the community was not anti-Semitic. And I think it's one of the positive lessons for young people, because so much about the Holocaust is, in the end, about loss, and about, there's never a happy ending, but there are very good people, individuals or communities that risk their lives to save Jewish people. When my father joined the French army, which was very common for immigrants or foreigners to do that, especially when Poland was invaded. When I was 2 years old, Poland was invaded. So these young people like my father, who were very political back in Poland, everybody was political because it's such a political environment. So he was anti-fascist, and he was scared of them, and so he joined the French army in some ways to help protect Polish Jewry that was still there. So he joins the army, and he goes to this family, the Lepage family. He says to them, "Look, I'm going in the army. If something happens to my wife and I, would you hold on to our child, René, me?" And it's a strange request, but in those days, when you think, no one knew how long the war was going to be, and for us, 2020 hindsight, it's we know it lasted a long time, but they had no idea. So I think my father assumed it was going to last a few months, and then they would sign some kind of armistice and blah blah blah. And that's not the way it happened. So he gives me to the family. He goes off to the army with his unit, and because they were immigrants, they always used those types of soldiers to do the worst types of duty. He goes up to the front when France is first invaded, and he's killed. His unit is pretty much wiped out, and it leaves me with my French family, and that that was and it remained that way. Now, in the first couple of years of the war, the Germans were still trying to figure out what to do with these Jews, and they didn't have the death camps yet. They only, opened up the death camps with the gas chambers and a couple years later in 1942. But before that, you could still function for a while, right? And it was a slow strangulation of the Jewish community legally through laws that they established. But my mother continued to work in Paris for a little while, and she would come and see me, but I was still so young that I don't remember her. And then at some point, she did have to stop coming to see me because it was too dangerous, and she herself went into hiding physically. And that's when we assumed, my French family assumed, that my mother was now dead. And they proceeded to have me baptized Catholic, and they were going to adopt me. I really was hidden in the house in this little town for the entire war, which was about over 4 years in France. And I really did not ever go out or have any kind of social life or social interaction with other kids, because that was the safe way to survive, both for me and for my French family, because if it was German law that if you help a Jew in any way, you can be sent away to the east, which meant labor camp, death camps, and things like that. Not only was the Jews punished, but the Christians as a community example, a collective punishment. That's what it was called. It's all legal stuff written by Germans, by German lawyers. That's all the law. That's how I lived. I never went out of the house. I don't, and no one ever came to the house. No one ever came to the house, which was, again, part of the security. Now, I could have been told to go upstairs sometimes. Maybe somebody came over, but I don't remember anybody ever coming over. And then I found out when the war ended that next door lived my Papa's sister. I had no idea. And she actually, we just found out, she actually was hiding Jewish kids herself. You can see how secrecy was so important. Mama Nana told me a story. At the end of her life, she said, she was trying to explain to me how important it was to be secretive as possible. She said she was in town doing some kind of shopping, and she was in a store. And in the town, those little towns, everybody knows your business. And they know who you are, they know what blah blah blah, they know your history, etc. And so they knew that they had no children, the Lepage family. They took children in periodically. So at one point, the lady in the store says to Maman Madame Lepage, you take children in. If you have any Jewish children, you have to register them with the authorities. You got to get an ID card. Now, when you register the Jewish kids, when it's time for the Germans to pick up the Jews, they go to the police and they said, give us a list of all the Jews in your town, including the children, and there's a record. And so she's saying you have to register them with the if they're Jewish kids. And Mama Nana started to make up a story. And the husband of the woman says, stop asking questions and go back doing what you were doing. Mind your own business. Don't butt into other people's business, etc. So you could see how being too public and, going out, buying a lot of food all the time when everybody knows there's only two of you with a little baby. Imagine what it was like for the family that was hiding, the Anne Frank family, where they were buying food for 8 or 9 people. how do you do that when you have just a few tickets to buy food with? So those are really, important questions. But fortunately, because we were self-reliant as regard food, we didn't have to be so public. And then the war ended, and my mother came to get me. So that was very traumatic for me, and for most of the Jewish children. It was, it was a traumatic experience. That transition, that sudden transition, because we thought, I didn't know who this lady was. She shows up. She's, first of all, she's got a foreign accent, so kids are always, embarrassed by the foreign accent. And she said, she's taking me with her to Paris, and I was leaving my French family. It was very difficult to be Jewish, find out what that means. But I did. When you're a child, you do what you're told. So I went to live with my mother. There was no father, and she was still working. And I started attending school, and that's when I learned that I'm Jewish, because the kids starts making remarks, at certain times during the holidays, Christian holidays, when Jesus was crucified. I'm called a Sadrif, and I don't like being Jewish. Right? And I cry. I'm going home crying from school, and I'm telling my mother I don't like being Jewish. They're calling me names, and I don't understand why. And you lost your whole family. I lost my father, so why do I want to be Jewish? So the transition was difficult, but it was difficult for other kids. Most of us, felt a certain allegiance or responsibility to our Jewish identity. In my case, the fact that my father was Jewish, that he had died in the war, a certain responsibility. And it's not, verbally communicated. It's these feelings that you have, and the fact that my mother's very large Jewish family from Poland had perished because they were Jews. You feel a certain sense of responsibility to the people. And so I did as well. And then I learned about Jewish culture quite a bit, because in Paris, right after the war, between the war and when I came, there was about 5-year period where I met all my mother's friends. And so these were young Jews who, they were young and they had young families, and the world, they worked very hard, and they partied pretty interestingly. So there were these parties at my mother's. We had a fairly large apartment there. So there were these parties that I attended, and they sang, and they drank, and they played cards, and they played dominoes, and they were just, they were loud. There was a lot of smoke. Everybody smoked in those days. And they would say to my mother, it was all Yiddish speaking. So, the thing is, there was a Yiddish cult, there was a Jewish culture in those days, which I don't think we have anymore, because the language is gone. The language is gone. Yiddish is gone. And I think it's a great tragedy. So everybody spoke Yiddish. So they would say to my mother, Helena, sing a bissel in Yiddish, sing a bissel, and they would, suggest some songs that she should sing some. And my mother would start to sing, and much to my dismay, she had a beautiful voice. And they were always very sad songs. They were always Yiddish songs. They were always sad and sentimental. Very schmaltzy. But to me, that was such a positive example of Jewish life. And it was just beautiful. It was very, very warm. The main thing in terms of Jewish identity, I was exposed to the Jewish culture to such a degree. and I loved it so much, and again, everybody spoke Yiddish. So that was Yiddishkeit to me. And then I had that when I came to the United States, because when I came to the United States, we lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, you know, which was a ultra Orthodox neighborhood, still is, but it was also very multi-ethnic. There were Puerto Ricans and blacks, Irish and Italians, and my public school was very, very mixed. And I remember the first thing thinking when I came to the States was, you know, in France, I was the only foreigner. I was the only other. Right? I was the Jew, and because there were Arabs, but it wasn't quite the same. Being Jewish, you know, uh, I was Christ killer. Whereas when I got to New York, there were all these others that were Italians and Irish, and nobody cared if you were Jewish. They couldn't care less. Plus, there were a lot of Jews, and so in terms of Jewish identity, I liked it very much. I liked Williamsburg. I liked the public school that I went to. I liked the teachers. I loved it. At some point, I realized, well, we Jews, because you spend your life obsessed with trying to understand this Jew hatred. It's like, why did why are they picking on us? Can you pick on somebody else? Give me a break. Choose somebody else. Don't choose. Dear God, please. Uh, so uh, so I was always obsessed, to find out these answers about fascism and why people become so ugly, and so, we were stereotyped. And then at some point I realized, well, we're not the only one, especially when I came to the States and I saw the way people of color were living and treated. I was in the U.S. Army, and I was stationed near the South, where they still had separate fountains and separate bathrooms for colored people and white people. I experienced anti-Semitism by the KKK in the military. So I knew that I had, that there were other people that were also oppressed and stereotyped. So I began to identify with those struggles, whether it was the civil rights struggle or the Vietnam War, the anti-war movement. I really felt that these Vietnamese people were just like, I just didn't trust what the U.S. government said. So I was very, very anti-Vietnam War, anti-war, and of course, what's happened with the immigrants as the scapegoat. It's we were the scapegoat in Europe always, and so if it's not one scapegoat, it's another. And so the here in the States, it was first the Muslims, and then and then the Mexicans, and it's always been the blacks, of course, and but and now it's the Chinese. It's like it's unbelievable. And of course, the lessons of the Holocaust are supposed to be not to be a bystander. And I felt that I didn't want to be a bystander. I didn't want to be indifferent to the suffering of other people. And so it made it, very difficult to try to raise 3 children and have a job and try to do this extra work. But I certainly felt a responsibility to these struggles, and I still do. And I think the whole, and what I loved about, especially about Passover and about Judaism, is that we're supposed to care for the others because we were slaves. But we're supposed to care for the stranger and the widow and the orphan. And I remember when I would read these things on Passover, and I would just feel such an affinity and realize that the sages who had emphasized, they was just so incredibly wise and had such a sense of empathy, for the others, that it was quite amazing.